Hello everyone, welcome to another Classic Movie Monday. I apologize, this video is being uploaded late. Unfortunately, I was sick yesterday, so from technical issues now to being not all too well, that's one of this being the reason why unfortunately this video had to be delayed. But I am recovered, technically speaking, maybe 99.9%, so I can now get caught up. So without further ado, let me address what I want to talk about for this Classic Movie Monday, and that is Rear Window, another famous Alfred Hitchcock thriller slash mystery, which is definitely a category that Alfred Hitchcock is fairly well known for. And this particular story follows the tale of a guy named Jeff, who is unfortunately in a wheelchair. It is emphasized that he was injured, and that I guess both of his legs are casted, so he doesn't have a whole lot of mobility. Hence, he sort of kind of develops a little bit of a hobby of looking at his neighbors. Now you might be wondering, how is that really possible? Well, he lives in like a sort of an apartment complex, you could say, and when you live within that area, at least, you can kind of see more of what other people are doing. So it kind of only makes sense that due to his very, I guess, observant nature, he starts to really look at what the neighbors are doing across the ways in various apartment buildings, or technically apartment rooms, or technically houses that are apartments, because there's like multiple neighbors, and he can just observe all of them just by looking out. And the film shows this right off the bat fairly well. And it gives you a very interesting perspective, because usually, at least through my experience in life, I've never had to live in an apartment, or I wasn't really in that environment all too much. So to see it done through that perspective, I think really allows the audience to, I think, get engaged into what's kind of going on, and viewing things through, I guess, Jeff's perspective. And Jeff is played by none other than James Stewart, or some call him technically Jimmy Stewart. And eventually, after all of his observing, he notices some suspicious behavior by one particular neighbor. And this leads him to assume, based upon what he observes, that the neighbor has committed murder. In particular of his wife. And basically it's up to Jeff's character to sort of prove it. And you kind of see how he has a really difficult time really proving anything, considering the fact that he's just basing things off of his own observations, and he doesn't really have a whole lot of direct evidence to support his claims, but at the same time, there is, you can tell, some kind of strange things going on that you would kind of understand through Jeff's perspective why he would think the way he does. And what's great about a lot of these Alfred Hitchcock films, in particular this one, is the fact that it does leave things open for you to think exactly how all the events are sort of going to play out. And that's usually what good thrillers do. They give you a little bit of a window as far as really ultimately interpreting what could potentially happen. And again, some might say that there's maybe a certain amount of predictability in there. I'm not going to deny that that was sort of present when I was watching the film. But at the same time, there is still a lot of things that they kind of touch upon that you would expect these kinds of thrillers, in particular mysteries, to sort of touch upon, like various points into what ends up leading Jeff in particular to assume that a murder happened. And obviously this film, I think, resembles actually some other film that came out a little bit more recently. If you're familiar with the film Disturbia, the one that stars Shia LaBeouf, I think a lot of what's in that film got direct inspiration in particular for this film. And it only makes sense because the whole setup that Alfred Hitchcock presents, I think, is a brilliant setup, and leads to, I think, a lot of interesting moments, and therefore memorable moments that you can kind of, I guess, relate to, especially in the way in which the film is sort of really directed, which is done fairly well. Again, like I've mentioned before, showing things through Jeff's perspective. But I mean, it's pretty straightforward for an Alfred Hitchcock film, which is also something that is rather interesting because usually his films are kind of layered with various kinds of different elements. But here it's pretty stripped down. Like it's the plot is not as I guess layered. It's a little bit more straightforward. And that's, I think, also that's something important to note because it's, again, that's kind of what makes it, I guess you could say, unique from his other works. But at the same time, you could also say that it's a little bit more simplified. But I think despite the certain amount of simplicity that goes along with this particular film, there is still a lot of, I think, likability with the characters, and I think there's a lot of enjoyable moments that lead you to being engaged and wanting to know what ultimately ends up being sort of the end result. But yeah, I think that's really all I can say, though, without really giving too much away. If there are any questions, comments, concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you on the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.